There is a hospital in Leeds where a man named David has been waiting 14 months for a hip replacement. He can walk, just barely. He is one of 7.5 million people on NHS waiting lists in Britain today. 1 in 9 people waiting to be treated, in the 6th largest economy on earth. This is the National Health Service, the institution Britain is most proud of, the one it holds up to the world as proof of what a civilized society looks like. The same institution where ambulance response times have tripled since 2010. Where 1 in 5 A&E patients waits more than 4 hours to be seen. The country that invented the modern hospital, that gave universal healthcare to the world, cannot get its own people seen by a doctor inside a month. The NHS is not the only thing that stopped working. British wages in real terms are the same today as they were in 2008. 17 years, zero growth. The average London house costs 13 times the average annual salary. A worker on median wages would need to save every penny for 13 years just for the deposit. In 1990, a first-time buyer needed 3 years of savings for a deposit. Today, that same journey takes 14 years. A train ticket from London to Manchester costs 4 times more than the equivalent journey in France, and takes longer. The most expensive railways in Europe. Invented here, this is not a country at war, not under sanctions, not ravaged by disaster. This is the 6th largest economy on earth, and it cannot run its trains on time, cannot get its people seen by a doctor, cannot let its young buy a home. How does the country that built the modern world end up here? The answer is not one thing. It never is. To understand where Britain is, you have to understand what it was. Not the empire, not the mythology, the actual achievement. Britain invented the steam engine, the railway, the factory, the central bank, the concept of free trade. Not discovered, invented. It also invented parliamentary democracy, the idea that government derives its authority from the consent of the governed, not as a revolution, as an evolution. Over centuries, a system so stable that Britain has not had a successful foreign invasion since 1066, while every other major European power collapsed, was occupied, or rewrote its constitution from scratch, and then in 1948 it did something no country had done before. It created a health service free to every citizen at the point of use, funded by taxation. At its peak, Britain ran an empire covering 1/4 of the Earth's surface, the world's largest navy, the world's reserve currency, more manufactured goods than any country alive. The decline did not start with Brexit. It did not start with Thatcher. It started in the 1960s when British industry discovered it had missed the second industrial revolution entirely. The result was the 1970s. Rolling blackouts, rubbish in the streets, the IMF arriving to bail out the country that invented capitalism. Thatcher arrived with a solution. Destroy the old economy. Let the market build a new one. The coal mines closed, the steel plants closed, the shipyards closed. Some of them never did. The towns of South Wales, South Yorkshire, the North East, still looking. 40 years later, what replaced the factories? Finance. London became one of the 2 great financial capitals of the world. Money flowed in. The city boomed. Britain told itself this was the new economy. The problem with finance as a national strategy is that it works brilliantly for the people inside it and almost no one else. And the finance boom did one other thing. It made London property the most attractive investment asset in the world, which meant the people who lived there could no longer afford to. Here is what the housing crisis means for a real person. A nurse at a London hospital earns around £36,000 a year. She commutes 90 minutes each way from a town she can afford. She keeps the NHS running. She cannot afford to live near it. Britain builds around 200,000 homes a year. It needs around 300,000. The gap has been open for 30 years. Every government since 1990 has announced a plan to fix it. None of them have. Why has nobody fixed it? Because the people who vote most reliably in Britain are homeowners. and homeowners want their house prices to rise, and house prices rise when supply is constrained. So every government has a housing crisis and every government protects it. That is not a failure of policy. That is policy working exactly as the electoral incentives designed it to. Britain's productivity growth has been among the lowest in the developed world since 2008, lower than France, lower than Germany, lower than Poland. 1 in 5 children in Britain lives in relative poverty. In a G7 nation, with a monarchy, a seat on the UN Security Council, and a nuclear arsenal, 1 in 5. That number has not fallen meaningfully in 20 years. The food bank network that barely existed before 2010 now distributes over 3 million emergency food parcels a year in Britain in 2025. And then came Brexit, June 2016. Britain voted 52 to 48 to leave the European Union. The closest thing to a national nervous breakdown a democracy can have while staying technically functional. The Leave campaign promised that leaving the EU would free Britain from bureaucratic constraint, restore sovereignty, and redirect the money Britain sent to Brussels back into the NHS. The NHS waiting list when Brexit was promised to fix it, 3.9 million. Today, 7.5 million. The Remain campaign was no better. It predicted immediate recession and market collapse if Britain voted Leave. None of those things happened immediately. It raised the cost of trading with Britain's largest market, equivalent to a significant tariff on every export and import. It made Britain a smaller market for investment, slowly, quietly, in ways that don't make headlines but show up in the numbers. The Office for Budget Responsibility estimates Brexit has reduced UK trade by around 15%. The Bank of England estimates it has cost around 4% of GDP. That is not a rounding error, that is the difference between a functioning economy and the one Britain has now. But here is what makes Brexit unique as a policy disaster. Nobody will admit it, not the Conservatives who promised it, not the Labour government that inherited it. The word Brexit has almost disappeared from British political conversation, as if by not naming the wound it will somehow heal itself. This is not a left or right issue. It is about the fact that a major democratic country made a major irreversible decision. That is not democracy working. That is democracy producing a result it cannot process. And it may be the most British thing Britain has ever done. Underneath all of it, the NHS, the housing, the productivity, the Brexit. One thing ties them together. Britain has not invested meaningfully in its own infrastructure for 50 years. Britain spends less on public investment as a share of GDP than almost any comparable economy, less than France, less than Germany, less than Canada, less than Australia, so the road does not get built. The hospital does not get refurbished. The school roof leaks for another year. Here is the verdict. Britain is not a failing state. It is a managed decline. A failing state collapses. A managed decline maintains the appearance of function while the substance quietly hollows out. Britain is extraordinarily good at maintaining appearances. The changing of the guard still happens. The crown jewels are still there. The BBC still produces world-class journalism. The universities still rank in the global top 10. The surface is immaculate. It is what is underneath that has been quietly sold off, run down and deferred. The brain drain is the number that tells you what the people living it think. In the last 5 years, more than 1 million British citizens left the country permanently. Not retirees moving to Spain. Doctors, engineers, researchers. The people a country needs most to fix what is broken are the ones most equipped to leave. And leaving, world-class universities, a legal system trusted globally, the English language, a financial centre second only to New York. These do not disappear overnight, but the path back requires something British politics has not produced in 50 years, a government willing to invest now for returns after the next election. Britain invented long-term institutional thinking. The Bank of England has been operating since 1694. The thing it cannot do is apply that thinking to itself. Britain didn't lose its empire. it lost the institutional confidence that built one. That is not nostalgia, it is a statement about capability. The country that once organized a global system of trade and governance cannot organize the building of enough houses for its own people to live in. Back in Leeds, David is still waiting 14 months for a hip replacement in the country that invented the National Health Service. He has stopped counting the weeks. He does not blame the doctors. He does not blame the nurses. He knows they are doing what they can. He blames nobody in particular. That absence of accountability is the most British thing in this entire story. The ability to manage decline so gracefully that no single person can ever be held responsible for it. Britain built something extraordinary, not just the empire. That part is complicated. The institutions, the rule of law, the idea that the powerful could be constrained by written rules they did not write. The problem is not that Britain ran out of good ideas. The problem is that it stopped believing it could execute them. And the cruelest part, the part that makes this different from simple decline, is that the people inside the system mostly know this. The doctors know, the teachers know, and Britain, for all its decline, has not stopped expecting better. That expectation, unrewarded, stubborn, persistently British, may be the last thing worth protecting. Subscribe to World Fracture and tell me in the comments, is Britain in managed decline, or is this recoverable? And if you are British, do you stay or do you go? I want to know what you think.